The moment you realize that someone else's opinion of you is none of your business, you become untouchable. This single truth has liberated more people from psychological bondage than any other principle in human consciousness. Yet most of you sitting here today are still living as prisoners to someone else's judgment, someone else's manipulation, someone else's twisted version of reality. When did you first give away your power to someone who never deserved it? Think about that moment. Was it gradual, like a slow leak in a tire that you didn't notice until you were completely flat? Or was it sudden, like handing over the keys to your life because someone convinced you they were a better driver than you? The truth is, every single person who has ever manipulated you, controlled you, or made you question your own reality has done so with one fundamental tool: your willingness to seek their approval. They understood something that you forgot, that personal responsibility is the foundation of all genuine power. Narcissists, manipulators, and emotional predators count on you forgetting this principle. They build their entire strategy around your amnesia regarding your own authority. Let me tell you about Sarah. 3 years ago, Sarah sat in a coffee shop, her hands trembling as she held her phone. Her husband had just sent her another text message designed to make her feel guilty for visiting her sister. "You always put your family before me," it read. "I guess I know where I stand." Sarah had received hundreds of these messages over the past 5 years, each one carefully crafted to make her feel selfish, ungrateful, and wrong for having any life outside of serving his emotional needs. But something was different that day. Sarah had been reading about the fundamental laws of mind and consciousness. She had begun to understand that her emotional state was not something that happened to her, it was something she participated in creating. As she stared at that message, instead of feeling the familiar pang of guilt and the immediate urge to apologize, she felt something else entirely: clarity. She realized that his opinion of her actions was completely irrelevant to the rightness or wrongness of those actions. She was visiting her sister because her sister needed support during a difficult time. This was an act of love and loyalty, virtues that existed independent of his approval or disapproval. His text message was not a commentary on her character, it was a revelation of his. Sarah put down her phone and ordered another coffee. She didn't respond to the message for 3 hours. When she finally did, she wrote simply, "I'll be home at 6. No explanation, no apology, no negotiation, just a statement of fact. The response was immediate and furious, a barrage of messages designed to punish her for not taking the bait. But something remarkable had happened in Sarah's consciousness. She was no longer emotionally invested in his emotional state. She had discovered the secret that every manipulator fears, that their power over you is entirely dependent on your participation in their drama. That moment in the coffee shop changed everything because Sarah had stumbled upon the difference between true power and false power. True power operates from understanding and applying universal principles. It recognizes that your worth, your choices, and your peace of mind exist independently of other people's opinions about them. True power knows that consciousness is cause and conditions are a false power, on the other hand, operates through manipulation, control, and emotional dependency. It requires constant feeding from external sources. It demands that other people behave in certain ways for it to feel secure. False power is always afraid because it knows deep down that it's built on sand. Here's what narcissists and manipulators understand that their victims often forget: human beings are meaning-making machines. We don't just experience events, we create stories about what those events mean. The narcissist's entire strategy revolves around controlling your story-making process. They want to be the author of your internal narrative. When they gaslight you, they're not just lying about what happened. They're attempting to become the authority on reality itself. When they triangulate you with other people, they're not just trying to make you jealous. They're positioning themselves as the central figure around which all relationships revolve. When they love bomb you and then withdraw, they're not just being moody. They're training you to believe that your emotional well-being depends on their emotional state. But here's their fatal weakness. This entire system only works if you grant them authorship over your internal experience. The moment you reclaim the pen, their whole house of cards collapses. Your mind is like a garden, and you are the gardener. This isn't just a pleasant metaphor, it's a fundamental law of consciousness. Whatever you plant in the soil of your mind will grow. Whatever you water with your attention will flourish. Whatever you allow to take root will eventually bear fruit in your external experience. Narcissists understand this law, even if they couldn't articulate it. They work tirelessly to plant seeds of doubt, confusion, and emotional dependency in your mental garden. They scatter the weeds of self-questioning. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am being unreasonable. Maybe I don't remember correctly. Maybe I should be grateful for any attention at all. These thoughts don't belong to you. They're invasive species, planted by someone who benefits from your garden being full of weeds instead of flowers. A master gardener doesn't negotiate with invasive plants. A master gardener doesn't try to understand why the weeds are there, or feel guilty about removing them. A master gardener simply recognizes what doesn't belong and removes it immediately. This requires developing what I call mental hygiene, daily practices that keep your psychological garden clean and healthy. Just as you wouldn't let garbage pile up in your kitchen, you cannot allow toxic thoughts to accumulate in your mind without consequence. Every morning you have the opportunity to choose what grows in your consciousness today. Will you plant seeds of self-doubt or seeds of confidence? Will you water the thoughts that diminish you or the thoughts that remind you of your inherent worth? Will you allow someone else's opinion to become more important than your own inner knowing? The law of mental equivalence states that your external experience will always correspond to your internal state of consciousness. This is not wishful thinking or positive psychology. This is a demonstrable principle that operates with mathematical precision. Show me someone who constantly questions their own judgment, and I'll show you someone whose life is full of people who take advantage of their uncertainty. Show me someone who believes they don't deserve respect, and I'll show you someone surrounded by disrespectful people. Narcissists intuitively understand this law, which is why they work so hard to control your internal state. They know that if they can make you feel worthless inside, you'll accept worthless treatment outside. If they can make you feel confused about your own perceptions, you'll defer to their version of reality. If they can make you feel dependent on their approval, you'll do anything to get it. But the law works both ways. When you cultivate unshakable inner authority, your external world begins to reflect that authority back to you. When you know without a shadow of doubt that your worth is not up for negotiation, people stop trying to negotiate with. When you trust your own perceptions completely, others stop trying to convince you that you're seeing things wrong. This isn't about becoming arrogant or closed to feedback. This is about recognizing the difference between genuine guidance from people who have your best interests at heart and manipulation from people who have their own interests at heart. The manipulator reveals themselves through their method. Someone who truly cares about your growth will present information and allow you to make your own decision. Someone who wants to control you will use emotion, urgency, and guilt to bypass your rational thinking process. Someone who respects your intelligence will explain their reason. Someone who wants to manipulate you will insist you simply trust them without explanation. Sarah's transformation didn't happen overnight, but it started with that moment of clarity in the coffee shop. She began to practice what she called opinion immunity, the ability to hear someone's judgment of her without automatically accepting it as truth. She started asking herself, is this person qualified to have an opinion about this area of my life? Do they have my best interests at heart? Are they speaking from wisdom or from their own unhealed wounds? Most importantly, she stopped being afraid of disapproval. She realized that someone's displeasure with her choices was simply information about their preferences, not a verdict on her character. This shift in perspective changed everything. The people who had been used to controlling her through guilt and manipulation suddenly found their weapons ineffective. Now that you understand the foundation of true power, it's time to examine the specific tactics that these individuals use and how their very weapons can become the tools of your liberation. Every narcissist operates from the same playbook because they all share the same fundamental weakness. They need you more than you need them. This desperate dependency drives every manipulation, every mind game, every calculated cruelty they inflict. Once you understand their playbook, you stop being impressed by their performance and start seeing them for what they truly are: predictable, insecure, and utterly dependent on your emotional reactions for their survival. What would happen if you could see through every manipulation the moment it started? What if their most powerful weapons became completely ineffective against you? What if their tactics actually revealed their deepest vulnerabilities instead of controlling your behavior? The first weapon in their arsenal is gaslighting, the systematic distortion of reality, designed to make you question your own perceptions. They don't just lie about what happened, they attack your ability to trust your own memory, your own judgment, your own sanity. That never happened. You're being too sensitive. You're remembering it wrong. You're crazy if you think I said that. But here's what they don't want you to know. Gaslighting only works on people who doubt themselves. It requires your participation. Every time they distort reality, they're actually giving you a gift. They're showing you exactly who they are. When someone consistently tells you that your memory is wrong, your perceptions are false, and your reactions are inappropriate, they're not providing information about you. They're providing information about their relationship with truth. Sarah learned this lesson the hard way. Her husband had convinced her that she had anger problems because she got upset when he flirted with other women. He had convinced her that she was paranoid because she noticed when he lied about where he'd been. He had convinced her that she was controlling because she expected him to keep his promises. The gaslighting was so consistent and so confident that she began to believe maybe she really was the problem. But then she started documenting, not to prove anything to him. She had tried that before, and he had simply dismissed the evidence or found ways to twist it. She documented for herself. She wrote down conversations immediately after they happened. She trusted her initial impressions instead of his revised versions. She stopped trying to convince him she was right, and started trusting that she was right. The results were stark. Patterns emerged that she couldn't see when she was constantly doubting herself. His lies weren't random mistakes. They were strategic distortions designed to confuse her and maintain his freedom to do whatever he wanted without accountability. His accusations weren't based on her actual behavior. They were projections of his own guilt onto her. When you stop participating in the gaslighting, something remarkable happens. The gaslighter becomes increasingly desperate and sloppy. They escalate their efforts, which only makes their tactics more obvious. They start contradicting themselves more frequently. They become angry when you don't react with confusion and self-doubt. Your clarity becomes their confusion. The second tactic is triangulation, using other people to manipulate your emotions and behavior. They'll tell you what their ex said about you. They'll compare you unfavorably to their mother, their coworker, their friend. They'll create artificial competition and drama by playing people against each other. Jennifer would never react this way. My mother thinks you're being unreasonable. Everyone thinks you have anger issues. But triangulation reveals their profound inability to have direct, honest relationships. They can't simply communicate with you about an issue. They need to recruit allies, create drama, and manufacture evidence that you're the problem. This isn't the behavior of someone who is confident in their position. This is the behavior of someone who knows their position won't stand up to direct examination. The reversal is simple. Refuse to engage with any conversation that involves a third party who isn't present. If Jennifer has something to say about my behavior, she can say it to me directly. Your mother's opinion about our relationship is irrelevant to me. If everyone really thinks I have anger issues, they can address it with me personally. Watch what happens when you refuse to be triangulated. The manipulator is suddenly forced into direct communication, which is their weakest position. They can't manufacture consensus. They can't hide behind other people's supposed opinions. They have to stand on their own position, which they know is indefensible. The third weapon is the cycle of love bombing, followed by devaluation. This creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive pattern known to human psychology. They shower you with attention, affection, and promises. They make you feel special, chosen, perfect. Then they withdraw all of that warmth and replace it with criticism, neglect, and emotional punishment. Then they return with the love bombing, and the cycle continues. This pattern is designed to create emotional addiction. Just like a gambler who can't stop pulling the slot machine lever, you become addicted to the high of their approval, and terrified of the low of their rejection. You start walking on eggshells, trying to figure out what you did to cause the shift, desperate to get back to the good time. But once you understand the pattern,
you realize it has nothing to do with your behavior. The cycle isn't triggered by anything you do or don't do. It's a deliberate strategy designed to keep you emotionally off balance and dependent on their validation. The love bombing isn't genuine affection, it's bait. The devaluation isn't accurate feedback, it's punishment for being human. The reversal is to maintain emotional equilibrium, regardless of which phase they're in. Don't celebrate the love bombing, and don't catastrophize the devaluation. Treat both phases as equally meaningless performance, designed to manipulate your emotional state. When they're love bombing, think, this is the manipulation phase. When they're devaluing, think, this is also the manipulation. Watch how frustrated they become when their cycle doesn't produce the desired emotional response. They'll often escalate the extremes. More dramatic love bombing, more cruel devaluation, because their drug of choice, your emotional reactivity, is no longer being supplied. The fourth tactic is projection, accusing you of exactly what they're doing. If they're lying, they'll accuse you of being dishonest. If they're cheating, they'll accuse you of being unfaithful. If they're manipulating, they'll accuse you of being controlling. If they're being selfish, they'll accuse you of being self-centered. Most people respond to projection by becoming defensive, trying to prove their innocence, providing evidence of their good character. This is exactly what the projector wants, to put you on the defensive, while avoiding any examination of their own behavior. But projection is actually a confession. Every accusation is a revelation of their own conscience. When someone consistently accuses you of behaviors that don't match your character, they're telling you exactly what they're doing. They're providing you with intelligence about their own secret activities and motivation. The reversal is to receive their projections as information about them, not about you. When they accuse you of lying, think, they're lying about something. When they accuse you of cheating, think, they're being unfaithful in some way. When they accuse you of being selfish, think, they're acting from pure self-interest, and they know it. You don't need to defend yourself against projections. You can simply say, that's not my experience of myself, and let it stand. You don't need to prove your innocence to someone who is determined to believe you're guilty. Your energy is better spent paying attention to what their accusations reveal about their own hidden behavior. The fifth weapon is isolation, systematically cutting you off from friends, family, and support systems. They'll find reasons why your friends are bad influences, why your family doesn't understand you, why you don't need anyone else because you have them. They'll create conflicts between you and your support network. They'll schedule important events during your time with others. They'll make it emotionally expensive to maintain relationships outside of their. Isolation serves two purposes. It makes you more dependent on them for emotional support, and it eliminates witnesses to their behavior. People who love you and see you regularly will notice changes in your mood, your confidence, your behavior. They'll ask questions. They'll provide perspective. They'll remind you of who you were before this relationship. The reversal is to treat every attempt at isolation as a red flag that requires immediate action in the opposite direction. When they try to turn you against a friend, invest more time in that friendship. When they criticize your family, spend more time with your family. When they suggest you don't need anyone else, that's your cue that you desperately need to strengthen your connections with others. Here's what they don't understand. Healthy relationships want you to have other healthy relationships. Love multiplies. It doesn't divide. Someone who is good for you will encourage your other positive connections, because they understand that a person with a strong support network is happier, healthier, and more capable of love.
The psychology behind all these tactics is the same. Narcissists are emotional vampires who require constant feeding from external sources. They have no internal source of self-worth, no genuine self-confidence, no authentic identity. They exist as parasites on other people's emotional energy. This is why they're so skilled at finding your emotional buttons and pushing them. Your emotional reactions are their food source. But this dependency is also their greatest weakness. When you stop providing the emotional reactions they crave, they begin to starve. When you refuse to be confused by their gaslighting, triangulated by their drama, addicted to their cycles, defensive about their projections, or isolated by their manipulation, they lose their power source. The most powerful reversal of all is understanding that their entire system depends on your emotional investment in their opinion of you. The moment you become genuinely indifferent to their approval or disapproval, their whole arsenal becomes useless. Not fake indifference, genuine, authentic disinterest in their emotional state and their judgment of your choices. This doesn't mean becoming cold or cruel. It means recognizing that someone who uses these tactics has disqualified themselves from having meaningful input in your life. You can be polite, you can be civil, you can even be kind, but you don't have to care what they think about anything. When you achieve this level of detachment, something miraculous happens. They often lose interest in you altogether and move on to easier targets. Narcissists don't enjoy relationships where they can't create drama, confusion, and emotional dependency. They need victims, not equals. When you refuse to be a victim, you often cease to be interesting to them. The key to all these reversals is preparation and practice. You cannot wait until you're in the middle of a manipulation to figure out how to respond. You must develop these skills in advance, practice them in low-stakes situations, and build the mental habits that will serve you when the pressure is on. Your freedom begins the moment you decide that your peace of mind is more valuable than their opinion. But freedom isn't a one-time decision, it's a daily discipline. It's built through small, consistent actions that create an unshakable foundation of psychological sovereignty. The person who waits until they're under attack to build their defenses has already lost the war. Think about this. What would your life look like if manipulation attempts simply bounced off you like rain off a well-oiled coat? What if their emotional storms couldn't disturb your inner calm? What if their approval or disapproval had no more impact on your decisions than the opinion of a stranger on the street? This level of psychological immunity doesn't happen by accident. It's constructed through specific daily practices that rewire your automatic responses and strengthen your mental boundaries. Every morning, you have the opportunity to armor yourself against manipulation, not through hardness or cynicism, but through clarity and inner authority. The first discipline is what I call the morning fortress. Before you engage with anyone else, before you check messages or respond to demands, you spend 5 minutes establishing your psychological territory for the day. Sit quietly and remind yourself of 3 fundamental truths. Your worth is not determined by anyone else's opinion. Your reality is not subject to anyone else's interpretation. And your choices are not required to make sense to anyone else. This isn't positive thinking or wishful affirmation. This is conscious recognition of universal principles that operate whether you acknowledge them or not. Your worth exists independent of recognition. Your perception of reality is valid independent of confirmation. Your right to make choices exists independent of approval. During these 5 minutes, visualize yourself moving through the day with unshakable inner authority. See yourself responding to manipulation attempts with calm clarity. See yourself maintaining your boundaries without anger or guilt. See yourself choosing your responses based on your values rather than someone else's emotional state. This mental rehearsal creates neural pathways that serve you when pressure arrives. Under stress, your brain defaults to whatever patterns you've practiced most frequently. If you've practiced doubt, confusion, and people-pleasing, that's what will emerge under pressure. If you've practiced clarity, boundaries, and self-authority, those responses become automatic. The second discipline involves building your response arsenal, specific phrases and techniques that neutralize manipulation attempts before they gain momentum. When someone tries to gaslight you, you don't argue about reality. You simply state, "That's not my experience," or "I remember it differently," and refuse to debate further. You're not trying to convince them, you're establishing that your perception stands independent of their acceptance. When they attempt triangulation, you redirect immediately. "I'm only interested in direct communication between us," or "other people's opinions about our relationship aren't relevant to this conversation." You refuse to be drawn into drama involving third parties who aren't present to speak for themselves. When they try to make you defensive through projection, you use what I call the acknowledgement without acceptance technique. "I can see you feel that way," or "That's your perspective," or "I understand that's how it seems to you." You're not agreeing with their assessment, you're simply acknowledging that they've expressed it. This removes their ability to escalate through your defensive. The most powerful phrase in your arsenal is simply, "That doesn't work for me." You don't need to explain why, you don't need to justify your position.
You don't need to negotiate or compromise. When something doesn't align with your values, your peace of mind, or your well-being, it simply doesn't work for you. Watch how frantically they scramble when you stop providing explanations for your boundary. Manipulators depend on your need to justify yourself, because justifications can be argued with, twisted, and used against you. Boundaries without explanations are like walls without handholds, impossible to climb. The third discipline is strategic relationship building. Narcissists thrive in isolation, which means your social connections become your strongest defense. But this isn't about surrounding yourself with just anyone. You need 3 circles of support: your inner circle of trusted advisors, who know your situation and can provide perspective; your middle circle of friendly witnesses, who see you regularly and notice changes in your behavior or mood; and your outer circle of professional resources, who can provide expertise when needed. Your inner circle consists of 2 or 3 people who understand what you're dealing with and have your best interests at heart. These are people who knew you before the manipulation began and can remind you of who you really are. They're not trying to fix you or tell you what to do. They're simply bearing witness to your experience and reflecting your strength back to you when you can't see it yourself. Your middle circle includes colleagues, neighbors, distant relatives, and casual friends who interact with you regularly. These people might not know the details of your situation, but they serve as reality checks. They see you as you move through the world and notice when something changes. Their casual observations often provide crucial perspective. You seem different lately, or you used to be more confident about your opinions. Your outer circle includes therapists, lawyers, financial advisors, or other professionals who can provide expertise when you need it. Having these resources identified in advance means you're not scrambling to find help when crisis hits. You know who to call for what kind of support. Documentation becomes a crucial part of this discipline. Keep records of conversations, incidents, and patterns of behavior. Not because you're building a legal case, but because manipulators depend on your memory being fuzzy and your perception being uncertain. Clear records eliminate the possibility of successful gaslighting and provide evidence of patterns that might not be obvious in isolated incidents. The fourth discipline involves what I call controlled vulnerability, strategic sharing that builds allies without exposing weaknesses. You learn to share enough truth to help people understand your situation without providing ammunition that can be used against you. You tell your inner circle everything. You tell your middle circle enough to help them support you appropriately. You tell your outer circle only what they need to know to provide effective professional assistance. This isn't about being secretive or deceptive. It's about recognizing that different relationships serve different purposes and require different levels of information. The person who demands to know everything about your situation while providing nothing in return is revealing their motivations through their curiosity. Advanced practitioners learn to use the narcissist's tactics against them through what I call the paradox strategy. When they demand excessive attention, you give them complete indifference. When they try to create jealousy, you show genuine happiness for other people's success. When they attempt to isolate you, you become more social than ever. When they try to make you dependent, you become more independent than you've ever been. This isn't about playing games or seeking revenge. It's about refusing to dance to their music. Every manipulation attempt requires your cooperation to succeed. When you consistently respond in ways that don't feed their agenda, they often lose interest and move on to easier targets. The fifth discipline is eliminating self-sabotage patterns that keep you trapped in toxic dynamics. The most common mistake is perfectionism, waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, or the perfect circumstances to implement boundaries. Perfection is the enemy of protection. A boundary enforced imperfectly is infinitely more valuable than a boundary planned perfectly, but never implemented. Another trap is guilt management. Healthy people feel guilty when they violate their values. Manipulators exploit this by convincing you that enforcing boundaries violates the value of kindness or compassion. But true kindness doesn't enable destructive behavior. True compassion doesn't sacrifice your well-being for someone else's comfort. Setting boundaries with manipulative people is one of the most loving things you can do, for yourself and for them. Fear processing is equally important. You will be afraid of retaliation, abandonment, or escalation when you begin enforcing boundaries. This fear is normal and doesn't indicate that you're doing anything wrong. Fear is information, not instruction. It tells you that something important is at stake, but it doesn't tell you what action to take. The sixth discipline consists of 5 daily practices that compound into psychological sovereignty over time. Every morning, spend those 5 minutes establishing your mental territory. Every interaction, practice responding from choice rather than reaction. Every evening, conduct an energy audit, reviewing what you gave versus what you received, what built you up versus what tore you down. Weekly, assess your progress in emotional independence. Are you less affected by their moods? Are you clearer about your own preferences? Are you more confident in your perceptions? Monthly, celebrate the small wins that indicate your growing freedom. The first time you don't apologize for something that isn't your fault. The first time you don't take responsibility for someone else's emotional state. The first time you choose your own happiness over their approval. Create your personal declaration of independence, a written statement of your psychological sovereignty that you can reference when manipulation attempts cloud your thinking. This might include reminders like, my worth is not determined by their opinion. My reality is not subject to their interpretation. My choices are not required to make sense to them. My peace of mind is more valuable than their approval. The final element is implementation accountability that doesn't depend on the manipulator's validation. Track your progress through your own observations and the feedback of your trusted circle. Measure success by your increasing sense of freedom, not by their changing behavior. Their behavior is beyond your control, but your response to their behavior is entirely within your power. Remember where we started, with the recognition that someone else's opinion of you is none of your business. Now you have the tools to live that truth daily. Now you understand that their tactics reveal their weaknesses rather than expose yours. Now you know that freedom isn't something you find, it's something you build, one boundary at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. Your liberation begins today, not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, not when they finally understand or approve, but right now, with your next choice. They can only control you with your permission, and starting today, that permission is revoked. The person you were before you gave away your power is still inside you, waiting for you to remember who you really are. It's time to come home to yourself.